Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CDFA Hotline. My name is Kristen Shearin. I'm the Director of Education for the Institute of Divorce Financial Analyst, and I'm excited to be here with you today. John Duffy from Zen Divorce Solutions is back as my co-host today. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
You can find John at www.zendivorcesolutions.com. For those of you who missed our last episode, we thought we'd switch up our format a little bit and give our certified divorce financial analysts, as well as the general public, an opportunity to ask questions about divorce and the divorce process. John and I are both CDFAs, and we're hoping this hotline will generate some discussion that you might find helpful. The purpose of our show is to provide general information as it relates to divorce and to showcase how certified divorce financial professionals can help. While we will be answering questions from CDFAs and the public about divorce and finances, we cannot offer personalized financial or legal advice. The reason for this is because each divorce is so specific. There are many factors that impact your particular situation, such as state-specific statutes or guidelines. We're going to answer questions generally and hope to steer you towards resources, information, and professionals that can help you. But nothing you hear here on this show should be construed as legal advice, financial advice, or tax advice. I really can't emphasize that enough. Please do not consider anything you hear on the show today as a reason not to seek advice that is specific to your individual situation and geographical area, as that can vary wildly. This show is educational, not advisory. We do, however, hope to provide you with some great information and resources that can hopefully point you in the right direction. All right, so we have our first question today, and it is from Doug. And Doug says, I was wondering if there are different kinds of separation. I'm not sure if I want to get divorced, but we need to do something.
Good question. Yes, there are different kinds of separation. I mean, there is legal separation, which is where you are actually working through the legal process to separate the two of you. It's not a full divorce, but it is a separation. But in terms of wanting to do something different, there are lots of things people do. Trial separation. Somebody move out for a little bit. Somebody go to stay at a Verbo or an Airbnb for a week or two. Just get out of the house, change up the dynamics a little bit, give everybody a chance to think about what's happening and maybe recognize in the other person's absence that what the problem might be and how the two of you can address it. So absolutely. If things don't feel like they're working well, first of all, have a conversation about it. Hopefully you can both mutually acknowledge that, and then talk about what you think might be helpful to try to find a solution that's more long-term than a separation. Anything to add, Kristen?
No, that was a great answer. I guess I would just say, one of the things that you could do is to seek the advice of a divorce coach or certified divorce financial analyst to help you come up with the rules of what that trial separation might look like financially. It's a lot of times it's a good idea to get an idea of what having individual finances might look like during your trial separation so that you can really make an informed decision about whether or not you want that to be a permanent position that you might take.
Yeah, good point. Let's see. Jason says, my wife and I have been married for 10 years and we own a business together. We're both heavily involved in the day-to-day operations and neither of us wants to walk away. I'm worried that if we split the business, it will lose value or one of us will end up getting shortchanged. What are some of the best ways to handle dividing a business in a divorce while protecting its long-term success? And how do we split a business in a divorce without destroying it?
That's a great question. And it's not an uncommon question. A lot of people have small businesses, and those small businesses are both an asset and an income stream. And it's really challenging to divide that when you're in a financial bracket that you really, that when the company is not large enough to do that on a scale that would allow both of you to be financially independent from each other. So I've done it in quite a few situations. Certainly, I think that this is an area where you need to get some professional help. If you're going to do this, what you need is a business operating agreement. And you need a business operating agreement the exact same way you would have one if you had a partner, a business partner. And, I don't think that this works well long term. I have seen it work well long term in a few situations. But mostly what I think this it, this is a good opportunity to do is to get together with the CDFA, get together with a business attorney, draft up a operating partnership agreement that allows you both to have specific duties within the business and to be specifically compensated from the business. And then what I like to do is put in a time frame for how we're going to wind one of the spouses out of the business. And it doesn't have to be something that happens, in a couple of months. It can be something that you do over time. Certainly, I think putting in an exit strategy makes sense. But like you said in your question, how do we divide this business without destroying it? Well, that's where you get together with some professionals and you come up with a plan for how we are going to compensate the other person for this business. How are we going to hire a replacement worker to do what they do in the business? How are we going to transition that out? And that can take years. I've seen I've put together plans where that takes 3 to 5 years. I've put together plans where that takes a year. But certainly it's not something that you can figure out yourself, because you're going to need a financial neutral and a business advisor in some capacity to come in and help you figure that out and help you work out the legal documentation for how that is going to happen. So it's just not something that you can do yourself, but it can absolutely be done, and I've seen it done before.
Yeah, I have as well. Although I think more often than not, I see somebody exiting the company sooner than later.
Mm.
One of the most immediate things I would suggest to you is if both of you are kind of at an equal level, that you consider introducing somebody to be a tiebreaker. Because obviously, if you're each kind of 50-50 decision, how do you decide the tie, or at least some format for that? It's going to be a challenge because it simply is the nature of divorce. I've seen couples who will would definitely be successful in this, and I've seen other couples that there's just no way that this works out. So it really depends on your two dynamics,
Mhm.
and if you can really stay focused on the business outside of the divorce and all the things that went into bringing you to a divorce. So if you're committed to it, I would tend to encourage you to try to move forward with it, but be realistic. If there's an inherent break of trust that is causing the divorce, that could linger in the business, and so just be aware of that. And like Kristen said, I think a good exit strategy over a period of time will give you the sense that this is the duration of time you need to hang in there for, and continue to build up the business so that it can be a little bit more sufficient and self-sustaining without you, and then to leave it. But it's going to be a challenge. So good luck.
That's really good advice. And the other thing I guess I would just say is I like to use that period of transition time for whoever is not going to remain in the business to start looking for outside employment or another opportunity. Um, and so that time is well utilized for that as well. But that was really good advice. And I would echo your thoughts. I mean, it's challenging. It's not an easy road to go down, but it can be done.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question from Shearin, and she says, "This is an odd question for a divorce hotline, but do you have any advice on how to have a long and lasting marriage?"
Yes. Thank you. That's a great question. We all unfortunately see all too often some pretty common patterns, I think, that lead people to divorce. I would say the one that I notice being just the biggest glaring issue is communication breakdown over time. I think we bring into relationships a lot of assumptions based on how we were raised and what our parents showed us. You find somebody, you fall in love, you have a lot of things in common, so you just kind of naturally extrapolate that you must have everything in common, and you don't ask the question sometimes about what their thoughts are on this matter, that matter, raising kids, what success looks like, what your career path versus your family path looks like. All of these things that can just kind of break down over time, especially if you're not having those conversations. Um, I would also say that I think, just generally speaking, men tend to stop kind of evolving after a certain point. You kind of get into this routine of I go to work and I make money, and that's your contribution to the family. Obviously, it's not always the men who are the primary breadwinners, but um, I see a lot where there's just kind of this pattern, and people become really good logistical partners, but not really good loving relationship partners. And that's really important to continue. You get busy with the work and the family and the kids, and you kind of forget that time, just the two of you, to spend good quality time together without your phones, without the TV on, and all of that stuff. So commit some time, block out some time on your calendar to each other on at least a weekly basis to have conversations and deal with things that don't have to do with the financial stresses of running a family. All of the taking kids here and there over the course of the week, and just talk as a couple. That's what I would say. Kristen?
Those are all great solutions. I always tell people two things. The first one is just say thanks once in a while. You don't
Mm,
even have to mean it. But just say thank you to that person for doing whatever it was that they did that day, whether they went to work and earned money for the family, whether they stayed home and drove the kids around, whatever it was that they did that day, whether it was laundry or emptying the dishwasher or bringing home dinner, just say thank you. I think people just really want to be appreciated for what it is that they do. And they're going to be a whole lot more receptive to any type of criticism or constructive feedback if they're feeling appreciated. So it's a great way to start off almost any relationship dynamic, whether it's a coworker or a spouse. Just say thank you. I think you'd be really surprised at how far it goes. And the second is, and this is a little bit of my feminism coming out, but I mean, you have to raise young men to be good husbands and fathers. We raise women to be good wives and mothers from a very early age. That's something that's, culturally taught. And we don't always teach young boys the same thing. We need to raise men to be good husbands and fathers. It needs to be something that is intentional. There are lots of wonderful husbands and fathers out there. They may or may not have somebody that's role modeling that in their life, but it's something that I feel like if we set out with an intention, that's how we're going to change these dynamics, and they're changing. But I think that that's something that, as a parent, that you can be aware of when when raising sons versus daughters. And that might be a controversial answer, but that's how I feel about it. And I've set out sort of specifically with my sons to do that. And that can look however you want it to look. But I think that those things need to be taught however you want to teach them within your family dynamic. But it needs to be something that is a focus.
I completely second that. That's very good points. We raise young men to not to show feelings, to not show weakness, vulnerability, all of these things. Just swallow it down and keep moving forward. But you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Very good points. Um, Lisa writes, my husband recently inherited a large sum of money from his parents, and he insists that because it's an inheritance, I have no claim to it. But during our marriage, he deposited it into a joint account and we used some of it to pay off our mortgage. How does that change anything? How do courts typically handle inherited money that's been mixed with marital assets?
So this is a very good question, and it's a very complicated answer. I think that this is an area where you're going to see a lot of misinformation online. And what I can tell you is that every situation, if you are trying to figure out if there is separate property or marital property, that is going to be a legal conclusion for an attorney. And while you can get advice on that issue from lots of different people in lots of different areas, the reality is that that answer is going to be absolutely specific to how that money came into your marriage, what was done with it during your marriage, Where did it go during your marriage? And where is it now? And so that is a question that you're absolutely going to need to seek advice from a divorce professional in determining what is or is not marital versus separate property. And so I would encourage you, anyone, if they receive an inheritance or if their spouse receives an inheritance, go and get some information on what to do with those funds and talk about what your intention is, whether you want to keep that separate or whether you want to make it marital, because you can very easily and inadvertently make it marital property. And if that was not your intent, you can easily accidentally do that. If that is your intent, then you should be having those conversations with your spouse. In this particular situation, it sounds like your husband has an intent to keep it separate. It sounds like he could have potentially made it marital. He may or may not have meant to do that, but that's something that you're going to want to go and seek specific legal advice on that situation. And it's just not something that anyone can answer for you without having those specifics of exactly where the money went during your marriage.
Yeah, separate property can be, I think, a very problematic part of divorce in that it creates some real tensions in the relationship. Sometimes both spouses are very aware of it. They are honoring it. There's no question in their minds about, it was an inheritance, it was a gift. You keep that. That's your own separate property. But a lot of times it can be a real sticking point and creates a lot of conflict. So yes, there's so much gray area around this, and you know, if you're going through litigation, this is a sort of situation potentially where both sides are going to hire forensic accountants or experts to kind of demonstrate how this was utilized and try to make the case for it either being community property or separate property or marital property, depending on the lingo of your state. But um, if you're working through mediation, the two of you can agree to whatever you want to. So if you want to make life easier on yourself and if you feel comfortable with it, if you feel like it is fair, which is obviously very subjective, because each of you are going to have a completely different version of what fair looks like for you. But if it feels fair within the context of your marriage and your relationship, then you can accept that as separate property. If it's something that you disagree about, I would say have a conversation about it. At the end of the day, what I find is that clients want to feel like they are going to be safe and secure. And certainly when something that you thought was going to be divided as part of the community or marital property is now looked at as separate property and it's not part of what you would be receiving half of, it can create a certain amount of stress. That person's going to be that much better off and you're that much worse off. But that might not be the case. So maybe be patient and kind of don't worry so much about that right off the bat. Work through the division of the property and cash flow and get a sense of how you're doing financially. And then you can kind of revisit that. You might find that you're already in an okay place and it's much easier for you to let go of that. But you might not. So think about, though, that there is a cost sometimes, especially when you're working through litigation to try to prove something. And the cost of that may well outweigh the benefit that you would receive from it. So just keep it all in perspective.
Good advice. Next question. Hi, my name is Chris. I'm thinking about getting an online divorce through an online divorce service. Is that okay?
Sure. It's got access to all the different professionals you might need: attorney mediators, CDFAs, certified divorce lending professionals, coaches. All of the different roles can be brought together for you. Um, I think more and more, ever since, of course, COVID, people are more accustomed to working through Zoom. And I think in some cases it can be advantageous if you and your spouse aren't great in the same room together, then online might be a wonderful way to do it. So I would say I'm sure that not all online divorce services are alike. So take a look at reviews, shop around. But there's no reason you can't do it online. Everything, I think it's very easy. It's very streamlined. Um, so just do a little bit of due diligence and go for it. That's my thought. Kristen?
I would just say, to echo what you said, not all of these online services are created equal. I would do a lot of due diligence when selecting an online divorce service. And, yes, to echo what you said, a lot of these things can be done remotely. A lot of these things can be done outside of a courtroom. I don't, I think that I would caution you to at least look at the regulations where you live and check into what is required in your specific area. And it's probably also a good idea just to get a consultation with an attorney, which is oftentimes part of these online divorce services, just to make sure that you're aware of what is required for documenting your agreement in your area. But yeah, a lot of the back work I think can absolutely be done through a lot of these services. And and I don't. What's nice about COVID and is that I think that it really changed the mindset of a lot of people when it comes to divorce and what can be done online and 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 how you can access services that are maybe outside of your area. And so, yeah, I think it's a trend that we're going to see more of.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, Kristen, this is a good question. I've seen this one a lot. I bet you have as well. Lisa says she has a strong suspicion that her husband is hiding assets, but she doesn't have any proof. He's been moving money between different accounts and suddenly seems to have a lot less income than he used to. What are the best strategies for uncovering hidden assets in a divorce, and how can I make sure I get my fair share?
Great question. This is where a certified divorce financial analyst can help you. It sounds like you don't have all the information that you need to determine where your assets are or where your marital funds are going. And so, this is where a certified divorce financial analyst can help you obtain the documents that you need, can go through them to look for these red flags, can help you identify additional documentation that you may need or may need to see. If the other side, if your husband refuses to give you these documents, then you might be looking at a litigation scenario where they need to be subpoenaed. But that's exactly where a certified divorce financial analyst can really help you answer all of these questions. The only thing that I would caution you about here is the longer that this type of behavior goes on, the harder it becomes to trace. It's a whole lot easier to go back, a year or two and figure out a roadmap for where the money went rather than going back, 6 or 7 years. A lot of banks don't maintain financial records past 7 years without, some additional steps. So my advice out here would be do this sooner rather than later. Even if you have these suspicions, what you can do is you can bring what you have to a certified divorce financial analyst and say, hey, is there something here that I should be concerned about? What steps do you recommend that I take? And they can help guide you through this process.
Yeah, great answer. I would just add that you mentioned that he was moving money between accounts. If these are joint accounts, you have access to them. And even if right now maybe you don't receive the statements or they come online and they go to him by email, if your name is on an account, that financial institution will give you access. So you can call, if you know what the bank is, you can call them and ask to receive statements or to have your own online access or something like that for joint accounts. If the account is only titled in his name, they won't be able to give you access to it. But if it's jointly titled, you can see it. Also, what I will often tell clients is run a credit check on yourself. Sometimes where assets will be hidden is in an account in your own name that you didn't open, but your spouse did. With with electronic, the requirement, very few banks need wet signatures anymore, and your spouse's social security and all the other information. So it's not difficult to open an account in your spouse's name. Sometimes this is where hidden assets occur. So I would just run a credit check on yourself. You will see all your open accounts and recently closed accounts. If they're all familiar to you, great. You don't have any concerns from that point. But if there are accounts there that you don't recognize, again, your name's on it. So you're going to be able to get access to it from that financial institution. That might be a place that you want to ask some questions if you see something like that.
seems a little divorce financial show to talk about this, but if you have these suspicions, you also might want to pursue some therapy, some marriage therapy as to what's going on. Why do you not have that transparency? But again, from a financial perspective, I would get ahead of it sooner rather than later because, is your husband gambling? Is he, racking up debt that you're unaware of? And all of those things can become your problem in a divorce later. If, did he take out another mortgage on the house? All of these things, if you don't do anything about it, can really wind up impacting you outside of just where did that money go? There can be debt that is all of a sudden your problem, or you could be losing assets that you thought that you already had and not even be aware of it. So, a counseling situation might be appropriate here, depending on, is there a drug problem? Is there an alcohol abuse problem? But certainly there's some type of, financial infidelity potentially happening. And that's important to talk about too.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I've seen all of those situations as well, so it's not uncommon. Um, I would say, our role coming into these sort of situations as CDFA is that we come in without judgment. Again, we're trying to help, one or both of you through the situation. Um, and we need to understand the full picture. So understand that we're coming at this just from a place of trying to help. We're not, we're not we're not worried about what's caused this, but we're trying to help you find solutions. So um, I recognize I get a lot of people who, clients who want to apologize for not knowing the finances better, or that this happened, or there's a level of embarrassment. I understand that, but don't let that stop you from getting professional help. We can help you through this, and we're not gonna share any of your secrets. Don't worry about that.
All right, we've got a question from Danielle. My spouse and I both want to keep the divorce as amicable as possible. We're considering mediation, but I'm nervous about whether or not it's the right choice for us. How do we know if mediation will work for us, and what should we do to prepare so that we don't waste our time and money?
Good question. I like mediation as kind of your default starting place, ideally. I mean, you're going to recognize if litigation is absolutely necessary, you're going to know that for sure right up front. And if you're thinking mediation will work, it probably will. What you both need, I think, is to be on the same page that for mediation to work, you're going to need to both be transparent with each other. You're going to need to willingly cooperate with each other, and you're going to have to negotiate with each other. The mediator is not there to give you um, your proposal. They're there to facilitate the conversation between the two of you, so that between a little bit of a natural give and take, you find your way through this process and all of the co-parenting agreements and the financial agreements. Um, if you don't think that you can work in that capacity with your spouse, or you don't think your spouse is willing to work like that with you, mediation may not work. But it doesn't hurt to start there and see if that will work. Um, if you have a sense that there's a possibility or a probability, I think that's a good place to start. It's going to be a lot less expensive than starting with litigation. You can change to litigation if you need to, if mediation is not working for you, or you could look to something like collaborative as well, where there's a little bit more support than a single mediator. We talked about this in the last show, so go review the former show that we did for that. Um, but you need to just be on the same page, and you both need to commit to mediation for it to work well. Anything to add, Kristen?
No, Danielle, I think you've got all the building blocks for to be successful mediation candidates. Um, you're thinking ahead. You want to be organized. You want to be amicable. All of those are all the right building blocks that you need to have a successful mediation. Um, uh, what I would suggest is to call a mediator and schedule a very short mediation session. You don't need to sit down and have your entire mediation take place all at one time. I like to bring people in for, maybe a 1 hour or a 2 hour mediation session. And during that time, we talk about the process. We talk about what everybody wants to achieve out of this. We talk about the documents that we're going to need to exchange to get through the process. And so most mediators are more than happy to schedule a 1 hour introduction session so that you can get a feel for their personality, um, and make sure that you guys are good fits for each other. And, so that might be a great way for you to start out, so that you don't waste time and money, and so that you're prepared for the process. But I think you're great candidates, and you've got all the right building blocks to be successful.
Ben writes, I agreed to terms in mediation that I now regret, but my divorce isn't finalized yet. Can I back out of a mediation agreement or am I locked into it?
So that is a good question, and that's going to depend on a lot of different factors. Um, did you sign a final agreement, or did you just agree to terms? So if you just agreed to the terms verbally, you're not going to be bound by it, and it's not uncommon to have some amount of buyer's remorse and to go home and kind of think about things, and to change your mind a little bit. And I think that that's an ordinary part of the mediation process. However, I do think that there is a point where you're entering the realm of bad faith if you start to back out of certain decisions. And so, that's something that you probably need to talk to a divorce professional about, to find out, did I in fact bind myself to something, or is this something that I can backtrack out of? I would say that if you're going to back out of something that you have agreed on, I think that you need to recognize that that's going to make the other person angry because they thought that they had made some progress in this situation. And so if you're going to do that, I think that you need to be prepared to articulate why you want to back out of those terms, what terms you want instead, what is the solution that you're proposing. And you need to expect um, some pushback on that, because the entire purpose of mediation is you've got to make agreements on certain things so that you can continue to move forward. And so there's going to be some hurt feelings over that one, even if you are able to back out of it legally. So just be careful when you're going through the mediation process. And if you need to take some additional time, that's what mediation is for. You don't need to agree to something that you're not ready for. Just say, listen, I think I'd like a little bit more time to consider this. Can we circle back again? And that's an ordinary part of the mediation process. So I would say, don't be pressured to agree to things that you're not ready for, but at the same time, um, recognize that that is part of the good faith that goes into this process. Is once you make an agreement, you really need to honor it.
Yeah, I think Kristen, you handled that question exactly right from really answering Ben's question. It kind of leads me to something that's a little bit more general in nature that may be helpful to any of the listeners, is that um, consistently a couple wants to work through mediation at a different pace. Somebody's probably been thinking about the divorce for months to even years before the other person finds out. And so they've kind of processed a lot of information and they're ready to move forward. The other person, they're hearing it for the first time. Um, they have a lot to deal with that they haven't had that same time to process. Um, when one spouse, and this is almost always the case, that one spouse is just less familiar with the finances. And so they're going to need more time to receive the education to kind of feel comfortable about being able to make informed decisions. Um, whereas the person who was more financially responsible for the finances, um, they're ready to move forward. They've already thought this through. They know what they want to do. They're fine with it. So if when you're working through mediation, if you allow the person who needs more time, if you allow things to progress at their pace, you're going to find that they are probably more confident in their decision making. If you force them along, if you put pressure on them, like Kristen said, to make a decision now, they might find themselves in this situation where they feel like they didn't have all the information they needed to make that decision. And now later, because they got that information after making a decision, they want to change their mind. So be careful about applying too much pressure for somebody to move forward. If they're completely paralyzed and having a hard time making decisions, I understand that that's frustrating, but ask them what they need to be able to make those decisions. Usually it's more information. Maybe it's consulting with other outside professionals, consulting attorneys, CDFAs, somebody in lending, coaches even to help them if there are some emotional issues that are going along with the financial decisions. So there can just be a lot of different things at work here. To have a successful mediation, I would encourage everybody to really work at the slower person's pace, be patient, allow them to make decisions with all the information that they need to feel confident in those decisions, and you won't have to backtrack like this.
Great advice. All right. Well, I want to thank John Duffy for being here again today. If you're looking for additional information, you can find lots of great resources on our website, which you can find at www.institutedfa.com. If you search under the public heading, there's a way where you can search for a divorce financial analyst in your area or across the country, as we discussed earlier. And we will also have a link below for anyone who wants to submit questions for our next episode. And finally, if you're a CDFA or a divorce professional, or you just want to learn more about the divorce process, I would encourage you to join us for our national conference, which is going to be held in Denver on May 7th through the 9th. We have a ton of amazing speakers, and I will put that link below if you're interested. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you, John, for your time, and we will see you at the next episode.